Welcome to the Mayo Clinic Human Optimization Project, where we're creating the blueprint to help you become the best human you can be so you can give your gifts back to the world. I'm your guide and fellow optimizer, Christopher Camp. We are social animals. We live in a society that requires us to effectively live amongst and interact with other humans regularly. And if we can navigate those interactions well, we tend to be more successful. A large part of living amongst others is feeling like we belong amongst others. This feeling of belonging sits at the root of our purpose and allows us to fulfill our mission. So, why is it so many of us struggle to feel like we belong where we are, and how do we improve that? In order to get a better handle on this, the title of our session today is The Importance of Belonging: Why We All Need to Be Accepted, Valued, and Connected. Our expert guest is Shawn Ehler. Shawn serves as the Vice Chair of Human Resources at Mayo Clinic, where he leads the people and development efforts. Before stepping into his current HR leadership role, Shawn's career journey at Mayo Clinic spans several pivotal positions, including nurse administrator, leader of nursing informatics, and the first senior administrator for nursing transformation. His work in belonging has also intersected with professional and leadership development, employee well-being, and the Mayo Clinic program in professionalism and values. Across all these areas, Shawn continues to center people at the heart of innovation, fostering spaces where every individual is seen, heard, and supported to reach their highest potential. The three big questions we're going to work through with Shawn today include our first one: what exactly is belonging and why is it so important? The second big question: why do we struggle to feel like we belong and to ensure that others know that they belong? And then lastly, what daily habits can we take to create an atmosphere of genuine belonging at work and at home? Well, Shawn, thank you so much for joining us today on the Human Optimization Project podcast. Really fortunate to have you here.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm very appreciative, Chris, for the opportunity to be here. Love what you're doing on the podcast and very grateful for the opportunity to participate.
Okay, thanks. Well, let's dive in here. So, we're going to get into our first section where we're going to really spend some time defining what belonging is and why it's important. So, I just want to start with that. As somebody who's dedicated so much of their life to this concept, when you hear the word belonging, what does that actually mean to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there are many definitions of belonging that exist out there. But the first thing that resonates with me when I think about belonging and what it means is the recognition that it is a fundamental human need. So we as humans are societal. And so having a sense of belonging is core. I think that when I think about belonging, it really is this state of being seen, heard, valued, supported that allows us to experience purpose, fulfillment, and personal growth in spaces. Lots of ways that we can think about what belonging means. And there's a lot of different models as we think about it in a personal and organizational context. But I think fundamentally it's recognized as a human need and what it allows us to achieve when we're in states of belonging, which is higher ability for us to perform and feel connected to the spaces we're in.
And you spoke on that from multiple different perspectives too.
Yeah.
You talked about it a little bit as an individual, but also as a part of a group, and also sort of societal as well.
Yeah.
So we'll get into those kind of different
Yeah.
layers of belonging in different categories or perspectives as we move through this. So,
Yeah.
in order for genuine belonging to occur, what are some of the key components that have to be in place within a given culture or environment?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, there's a few models that are out there, but one of the ones that I've resonated with the most is one that was introduced by Deloitte in their Human Capital Report in 2020. And they broke belonging down into three sort of dimensions: comfort, connection, and contribution. So, comfort isn't about just having like a comfortable chair to sit in or a nice place to live, but it really is about authenticity. Are we able to bring our full selves into the spaces and into the people that we interact with? Are we spending energy on masking ourselves, or having to hide pieces of who we are as individuals. So that's one component for genuine and true belonging to exist. The second in connection is essentially community, the relationships that we develop. And I think those two can be very closely related in the sense that these are authentic relationships. So are we able to create true connections with people? And they can look different, as we talked about before. The context can change. What a personal sense of belonging might be in our individual relationships, that connection might be deeper than what we would expect to see in a work environment. But I think again, authenticity and knowing that they are true relationships that aren't just at the surface level is important for genuine belonging to occur. And the third in contribution isn't just about being recognized. It's not, that is a component of it, but it's also recognizing why your contributions matter. So it goes back to purpose. Do we understand what our role is in the context of belonging? Again, whether that's a personal relationship or the community connections that we have, or in a work environment. I think that is something that is critical, and sometimes can be the most at risk. It's easy to lose that sense of purpose and understanding of how your contributions matter. And as we talk about it in the work context, especially now with modern types of work, sometimes it's not always easy to know how your role is contributing to the organizational strategy. And so I think a big opportunity for us to recognize in that third component there, how do we recognize people for what they do, but how do we also continue to connect them back to their purpose and why their contributions matter?
I like that, and I think all 3 of those components probably link to one another, and there's a lot of
Yeah,
synergy there, and I can imagine,
yeah,
you in order to feel comfortable and authentic, one, you kinda have to know who you are as a person and
yeah,
what you value and what you're looking for, and then you have to, number 2, do the connection with the other people around you who are hopefully like-minded and their values and purpose, and then
yeah.
hopefully your contributions are the things that do align with that. So you can see that all 3 of those things, will
Yeah.
connect and have a positive synergistic relationship with one another.
Absolutely. I think in this, as we think about this in terms of genuine or true belonging, one of the things that strikes me is the early definitions of belonging came as it was introduced by Maslow and his hierarchy of needs, and so this is back from the 40s. And just even in terms of recognizing the relative newness of us understanding belonging and its importance in organizational context, and how it allows us as humans to perform. I mean, some of the first randomized control trials around belonging didn't show up until the 2000s, and really expanded in the 2010s. So I think there's something in recognizing that there is some newness here. It's an emerging element for us that if we don't fully understand it, if we're still exploring it, I think that's to be expected, certainly as we think about the scientific evidence that's around it. But one of the things that is impactful for me as I think about the history of how belonging has developed to some of our modern day understandings of it. We really thought of Maslow's hierarchy as a linear thing at one point, right? And it still holds true that certain foundational elements of physiologic needs and safety and security need to be in place for us to achieve higher order thinking. But um, love and belonging would have existed lower than things like self-actualization, self-acceptance. And I think now we have a better understanding of how that might be dynamically connected. And the fact that self-acceptance and self-actualization is very closely related to, or could be related to, belonging. Um, One of my favorite quotes about belonging comes from Brene Brown, who is known to everyone, but from her book, Braving the Wilderness. And she says, true belonging doesn't require us to change who we are, it requires us to be who we are. And I think that again is it's a variation on how we may have thought about this before. Because in order for us to really know who we are, we have to go through those steps of self actualization, which shows the feedback loop if we think about this from Maslow's original hierarchy, from the top of that pyramid, self actualization, back to belonging. And again, that is maybe the variation between surface level belonging and genuine belonging, as you asked initially here in the question.
It's really good, and I think that it aligns with so many of the things for us as humans. We are complicated, and we're complex, and we are nuanced creatures, and our progress is rarely linear. We like to
Right.
we do the best we can to try to simplify these big concepts and try to give the step by step plan on how to get better at it. But in reality, most of these things take few steps forward, try to figure it out. Oh, you made a mistake or you learned
Yeah,
something new or you had a setback. Okay, that's a step back. Now let's take a few more forward. And so there is a little bit of a circular or iterative nature to so much of this that we
absolutely.
do. And figuring out who we are and determining our own authenticity and developing that self-actualization, I think, is absolutely part
Yeah.
of that process.
Well, and I think to your point, the linear pieces still sometimes serve us, right? So when we see people struggling in belonging, we might first think about, are there risks to their physiologic needs or their safety and security? It might help us to understand how they're responding to the situation, right? That there's some foundational component they're struggling with that is preventing them from getting to some of those higher order aspects. So while things aren't linear, as you rightly said, sometimes being able to describe it in a linear fashion helps us as we think through how might we address a situation or how might we improve a situation where it feels like belonging is really lacking, at least in terms of the context of this conversation.
Okay, let's jump into some common misconceptions here. I
Yeah.
know an easy one that I'll throw is I think oftentimes people think that belonging is something that really just applies to the workplace, and you kind of already mentioned how it's not just about work; that it's really in all aspects of our lives. What are some other common misconceptions you see around the concept of belonging?
Yeah. Well, I've addressed a few of them maybe too in the sense of like the linear nature of it. Like I think sometimes people feel like belonging is like a destination. Like we've achieved it. I now have it and I will always have a sense of belonging in this space. And I don't think that that's true. I mean, we're always filtering through new context. Things can change in our personal lives, things can change in the work environment. So it is dynamic. And I think as we grow and move through different levels of self acceptance and self actualizations, our own self identity can change, which changes again our relation to an environment, to a group, to individuals. And so I think that's something that can be kind of a misconception that it often feels like we're trying to achieve this. Once we've achieved it, then we're there. But it is an ongoing journey for us to maintain belonging throughout the course of our lives, throughout the course of changes that could occur in the various places that we are. I would say another is, sometimes there's this belief that in order to belong somewhere, you have to not belong in another place. I
Mm,
think that is a misconception in the sense that I don't know that everyone belongs in every environment, but I think everyone could belong. And so again, I think the potential is sort of the variation that I would introduce as a misconception just to challenge that thought process. And in going back to that concept of self-acceptance and self-actualization and that Brene Brown quote, I think it depends a little bit on who we are and what we bring into the situations, what belonging looks like to us. And knowing too that the model of the three C's: comfort, connection, contribution. Um, those are just models. Uh, Belonging is a very personal experience. So what it looks like for me versus you or another person, it can be different. The level of connection that a person needs can be different. And so I think there's another misconception is that belonging isn't the same for everyone. What someone needs to feel a sense of belonging, how they feel connected and as though they belong to people and environments, it can be quite different. And so I think we always have to be cautious that we aren't sort of establishing an expectation that may not be what the person is looking for. So it's both something to recognize and also why this can become quite complex, right? It doesn't look the same for every individual. And we have to be careful that we don't overgeneralize with models and understandings that we have to place the expectation that that's what it's going to look like for everyone.
And I think we also have to be careful to say too, this is how you have to do it. This
Yeah,
is how you have to go
yeah,
about belonging, and because it,
right.
it it really is sort of up to the individual. And I think probably one of the key determinants around that is intentionality and sort of determine, set your intention on what you
Yeah,
are looking for and what amount of connection you need and what type of contribution you want to make.
yeah,
Another one I wonder about too in terms of misconceptions is that I think that a lot of people see this as sort of an abstract concept
mm,
that's a little bit
yeah,
nebulous and kind of touchy feely, and but
yeah,
I can't really describe it. But you've done research in this area. You're talking
yeah,
about prospective randomized controlled trials, and so
yeah.
so tell me a little bit about that. How much science do we have behind it?
As I mentioned, I think it's emerging. A fair amount of the research has really happened in more of the academic spaces. And I think that part of the reason that I would consider the science that we have to still be emerging is just in the fact that we don't see it applied to all different contexts. I think that, as new models emerge, as we come to new understanding, it sort of requires us to challenge our understandings of what belonging could look like. But there is I think, enough compelling evidence to tell us that it is more than just a abstract concept. We have models that allow us to break down the dimensions and components of belonging to understand how we would construct or design spaces for it. And there's compelling evidence for the outcomes that it can produce. In some of those randomized control trials that I mentioned, there is higher academic success, uh, even higher health outcomes. From a work context, there's compelling evidence to show that in spaces where there's a higher sense of belonging, that we see improved retention and recruitment, and in some of those even as much as 50% reduced turnover. We see reduced absenteeism, increased productivity. Again, one of the studies showed 50%, 56% increased productivity, which again is unique. That has to be designed for the context, because how we measure productivity is going to be quite different based on the area. And then even things like net promoter score, which is, what our team members are saying about us generally in terms of would they recommend a place, either as, a patient from that context of belonging or from an employee. I mean, huge gains there, like 160%. And so I think there is compelling evidence to say this is not an abstract concept, that there is a scientific basis. And yet I think there's still more to do in that space so that we understand it more deeply and can wrestle with sort of the personal components of this, the individualized nature of it in relation to spaces, particularly like organizations, workplaces, communities where there may not be there is some shared values and purpose that requires us to convene with some shared understandings, which changes again that sort of context.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's emerging science, but overall, at least in the professional setting, it's pointing
Yeah,
towards improved productivity, improved
yeah,
satisfaction and retention, improved health outcomes, and
yeah,
then employees and maybe consumers or customers are overall happier. So I don't think it's a huge leap to extrapolate that if we also have belonging in our personal lives, that there's going to be positive benefits that probably align with those. So that's
absolutely.
fantastic.
Yeah,
So let's slide into our second section
yeah,
here.
yeah,
We're going to talk a little bit about why we struggle with this, why this is difficult for some of us. So I guess not to make it too negative, but how pervasive is the issue of not belonging?
yeah. I think it is probably pretty pervasive today. One of the things I'll mention, kind of in connection to thinking about the science, is we don't have great national or um, beyond national, I guess even, we just don't have great benchmarks. So it's a little bit difficult for us to say, with consistency, how pervasive that is. But I think that we see a higher experience of social isolation that's occurring, which indicates to us that people are struggling to find spaces of belonging. Humans like to categorize things. It's something that helped to protect us from threats in prior parts of our evolution. And so I think as a result of that, it often can create a sense of not belonging if we aren't included in whatever categorization it is. So I would say it is a fairly pervasive thing. And yet I think part of the solution to that is in that questioning of what does it mean to belong in a space, and why, what are the shared values that we would bring that could connect us to a space. So kind of challenging ourselves to say what could we bring into the space that might help us to connect better. But
Mm.
belonging is bidirectional, right? It is, and probably multi-directional, really. It isn't something that, if we think about it from a workplace setting or even a community perspective, it's not the responsibility directly of the workplace to ensure that someone belongs. It's a shared responsibility. The person also has to come in with a commitment. But what I think it is in those spaces, particularly for workplaces, is it's an opportunity. So responsibility, maybe not. Uh, we could still have some success without high proportions of a sense of belonging. But I think there's ample evidence that would support that when we have it, that there's greater outcomes that can be achieved. So I think an opportunity there.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I do think that we are seeing our world headed towards increasing, social isolation for a lot
Yeah,
of people, and at least if we describe social isolation in terms of a lack of genuine, authentic relationship and genuine community, I think now we're maybe electronically more connected than we've ever been. But if we look at our genuine, meaningful human interactions, those are definitely on the decline,
yeah,
which I think would support what you're saying.
agree.
So
Yeah,
I think you mentioned it being a shared responsibility between the individual and the group, and I love that
yeah,
concept. I think all of these things we got to look at in a bi-directional
yeah.
way. Can you tell us what some of the consequences are of not belonging, and maybe let's talk about it both for the individual, consequences for the individual, and consequences for the overall group?
Yeah, absolutely. I think starting from the individual level, I mean, I think it is much harder to maintain purpose, to feel a connection with colleagues, which might, in turn, it sort of is that initial sense of not belonging, maybe initial isolation, begetting further isolation, right? It creates a division that sometimes I believe it's not insurmountable, but it can have the perception that it is. So I think for the individual, it also can generate a sense of burnout in a lot of environments. When you feel like you're not connected to the environment, to the people around you, and in many cases, as we talked about with the concept of contribution being a core component of belonging, you may not be connected to the purpose of what you're doing. It's a situation where we commonly see burnout being introduced. So I think there's a huge impact to the individual and for the group. As we even think about the positives of belonging, the converse is true. So we will have likely higher turnover. So we're spending time onboarding new people, and again, that could be from a community team perspective, certainly from an organizational perspective. We know that there is a high cost there. We can see lower rates of productivity. So people aren't producing as much as they spend their energy trying to find ways to interact in an environment that they feel like they don't belong in. Their energy is not directed toward producing the outcomes that we've made a shared commitment to as a team. And then ultimately for the group, leaning back again on concepts that we know, like net promoter scores, we're unlikely to recruit or attract people into these spaces because generally what people are saying about it isn't positive. And so we're missing again, I think, the opportunity there. So I really think that it are probably spaces where there are not high sense of belonging, and yet, you know, there's the ability to produce outcomes. I think
Mhm.
that what is missing is the potential, right? Because I think the potential could be greater if we create these spaces. So it feels to me more than a nice to have. It's an imperative if we really are trying to challenge ourselves to be to achieve our highest potential.
And you see those, the detriment to the individual is pretty substantial. The
Yeah.
detriment to the group also substantial.
Yeah.
And you could pretty easily develop a pretty negative feedback loop for those two things too, right? So the things that are detrimental to the individual are then going to make them less of a contributor to the group, which hurts the group. The things detrimental to the group are going to are going to negatively impact the individual, and so you can see both of these things having a negative feedback loop and getting worse. And
Absolutely.
that makes me think too, if we flip that, okay, maybe if we make some progress here and the individual does a little better on this, and that's beneficial to the group. And if the group does better, better to the individual, and you can get a positive feedback loop at play potentially.
Yeah, it's like a win-win in that case, right?
Mhm.
I mean, the individual probably has a higher sense of purpose. They feel more connected, and the group is achieving higher outcomes together. And again, if we flip the converse, I mean, I think that's where the potential really exists to say it's
Mhm.
not that we can't function. We can have teamwork without a sense of belonging, but the ability of the team, the potential of the team increases when there is genuine belonging in place.
Mhm. How do we compare and contrast this concept of belonging with
Mhm.
also telling people, hey, you have to run your own race. You got to be your own person. Don't give in to peer pressure. I have 4 kids at home. We have this conversation commonly, and you don't have to do what the herd is doing, and stand out above the crowd. And so, how do we balance that sort of do your own thing, individualistic culture with
Yeah.
this need to belong?
Yeah. Well, I think again, this is where true belonging isn't just about agreement, right? It's not just about agreeing to get along or developing some sort of group consensus. It really is about being able to authentically express your perspective, being able to create genuine relationships where the people that you are working with are helping to drive you toward your highest purpose and your highest potential. And I think that a portion of this that is impactful is psychological safety. So psychological safety and belonging are not synonymous, but psychological safety is an important part of belonging. If we don't have it, if people don't feel like they can speak up, then it's unlikely that it's very genuine. We're losing authenticity, both
Mm.
from the perspective of the individual potentially being able to represent themselves, but also from the community or the connection component of this here. So I think in spaces where we're able to achieve true belonging, I think there's a balance of that there where the individual can come forward with their own needs, authentically represent them, and it doesn't have to be at the detriment of the group. But this is again is where I think the context matters a little bit. In some cases, when we're talking organizationally, we have to balance our own individual needs and desires with that of the group. And that can be different when we're talking about interpersonal belonging from a family environment or from friendships. So it's a great question, but I think that if we really achieve belonging, we're not asking people to sacrifice their own personal needs for the greater part of the group. We're rather asking them to be authentic and honest about what those are and finding ways again in this bidirectionality or multi-directionality to consider them in the shared commitment that we have as a group, the shared purpose that we have as a group.
Mm. Great. So you're saying that it is important to sort of stay authentic to your individual
Yeah.
self, but to do that in an environment that's going to be supportive of that. And I would say What we're also talking about is belonging is not the opposite end of that spectrum where it's complete sort of brainwash group think, only one way of doing it, no room for diversity of opinions or perspectives. That's not
Right.
what we're talking about with belonging either. In fact, you ideally you want a sense of shared purpose, but ideally you would like diverse perspectives, backgrounds,
Yeah.
approaches on how you can
Yeah.
go about that and achieve it. You actually don't always want to drive 100% consensus and groupthink and everybody doing exactly the same thing in the same ways.
Yeah, agree. And I think that, in that we generally achieve better outcomes because we've challenged ourselves to understand why we're committed to what we're committed to, why we believe what we believe as a group. But yeah, it is sort of in opposition of groupthink. Consensus is an important part of this, but consensus isn't always, about our need for concession. In many ways, it's about coming to shared understandings as a group. So I think it's how we get to that consensus that is critical. If
Yeah.
it's in an environment where we can challenge ourselves, where we can authentically represent different perspectives, we're likely to get to a better place that is something we can sustainably commit to.
Mhm.
Otherwise, we risk where this becomes sort of performative in nature, and people aren't deeply committed to what we're trying to achieve as a group.
Okay. So far we've defined belonging. We've talked
Yeah,
about the key elements. We covered some common misconceptions.
yeah,
We talked about some of the benefits of belonging for the individual and the group and some of the potential downsides.
yeah,
We also kind of clarified it with this, independent run your own race versus group think sort of thing.
yeah.
So it's pretty clear kind of what it is, and I think it's pretty clear why it's important. Now, the
Mhm.
next question is how do we do it? And so, in our third section here, we're going to talk about the daily habits that we need to take to create an atmosphere of belonging both at work and home. So, if we do a better job, as we do, before we do this, I want to ask the question, if
Yeah.
we do a better job of belonging,
Mhm.
what problems would I be solving in my life if I did a better job of that?
Well, I think again we have to sort of consider this from the multitude of contexts. I mean, I think from the individual perspective, if we find places of belonging, if we achieve this, I think again it takes a lot of energy to exist in a place that you don't authentically feel like you belong. So you're redirecting your energy to more productive applications. So I think also it's heavily connected to as we think about that sort of feedback loop of belonging, self actualization in places like this, you're likely continuing to understand yourself better, continuing to self actualize, becoming a more fully realized individual. Um, it's a more enjoyable experience to be in places where we feel like we belong. And so I think, again, not using our energy to try to motivate ourselves to get to a place to do something, but that's more organic. So I think from the individual perspective, tons of opportunity. I think from the group perspective, as we kind of have alluded to already, there's higher productivity. So we're going to achieve higher team outcomes. We're likely to draw people in, people, both through that net promoter score concept, but also from people seeing what can be achieved as a group. People want to align with that and be a part of it. So I think there's a multitude of things that we stand to achieve when we have a higher sense of belonging. And we're again, I think it really is about that energy and where we're directing it.
Mhm.
Because it takes energy to be in spaces where we feel like we don't belong.
Well, and we all feel pretty limited in the energy.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
definitely a finite resource. So our time, attention, and energy is challenging. And so I think
yeah,
anything we can do to save some of that is worth
yeah.
pursuing. So, all right, let's talk about how we can do it. So, why don't we talk about it first from maybe the perspective of a leader or a group or an
Yeah.
organization? What are some things that any sort of team, organization, family, whatever body of people, what are some steps they can do to ensure that the team members belong?
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, the one of the frameworks that I like is the three C's. So that comfort, connection, and contribution. So I think finding a framework that makes sense based on the context of your organization is impactful, and it allows us then to apply gap analysis and other things that would allow us to identify where we may be falling short in that. So I think there's sort of looking structurally at our organizations and whether we're empowering spaces of belonging. I think from a leadership perspective, listen. It's a fairly simple response, but important. As we've talked through in the conversation here, as much as there are frameworks and evidence that allow us to define belonging, it is still a personal experience. And so, what our team members need could be different. It doesn't mean that the leader has to account to a number of different variations, but I think listening to people allows them to feel seen, heard, key components of genuine belonging, and also allows us to think about how we might change the context and understanding of what belonging means to our team by seeing them authentically for who they are. And little things, right? Like learning about the individuals, checking on them day to day, showing a genuine interest in caring, thinking about recognition, but also realignment of purpose. As a leader, we are often called to be the inspiration for our teams, and so realigning them back to why does our work matter? How does it matter in the organizational context? What are we trying to achieve that helps keep that team shared purpose alive?
Mhm.
So I think just a few things there, but again, going back to to a framework allows us to really apply and say, are we structurally creating an empowered environment of belonging? And as I think about this from the context of Mayo Clinic, I mean, we have leveraged it through our primary value. The needs of the patient come first. That's the shared commitment, at least at the highest level organization perspective,
Mhm.
that we're filtering that sense of belonging to. It's the thing that we are all committed to together. And through that, then are we creating places where people can feel authentically connected, valued, and respected?
Mhm.
So I think that alignment back to our shared purpose and vision is critical for leaders to keep in context as well.
Mhm. Okay, that's a great list, and I like keeping around the framework of the comfort, connection, and contribution. And you gave us a lot
Yeah,
of great steps there. Now, basically the same question, but for
yeah,
individuals. And I think most of the folks out there listening are kind of probably wearing multiple hats in their
totally.
lives. And sometimes they're the leader, sometimes they're in charge, sometimes they're not. But we need to understand both perspectives. So, what as an individual, what steps can I take to
Mhm.
either find where I belong or do a better job of belonging where I am currently?
I think the first answer is engage, right? If we are finding ourselves as isolated, find ways that we might be able to reconnect and engage. I think as an individual too, this is bi-directional. It is a shared, there is some shared accountability here. I think we have to question and challenge ourselves to the things that we're feeling and experiencing to see what we are contributing. What are we bringing to the table? If we feel as though people aren't hearing our perspectives, that our contributions aren't being valued, are we helping to are we in turn doing some of that to others as well? Are we trying to align where our contributions matter to the overall team goals? I think that a part of what individuals can do as well, and this is, I know, like $1 million statement, but is in this self actualization, like understanding how they're filtering their experiences and how they relate to their authentic values, what they are committed to. I think that allows us to come into these situations more fully realized to understand why we have the response that we do. And I would say in going back to kind of the original statement I made around engaging, I think being authentic in that, and um, hopefully that there's some trust in the environment. I think that when trust doesn't exist, hope can precede it. So maintaining hope that by putting yourself out there, that you will receive a positive reception, or at least a reception that allows you to authentically represent your experiences. And then I think when those things can't occur, I think questioning if the environments and the people that we're struggling to feel a sense of belonging with, really, if we're able to align to the shared values, or if we feel like they're represented. I think that honesty is just so critical in this. And it comes from both the leadership side as well as the individual. But I think when that doesn't exist, that's when we see people struggling in situations for far longer than maybe they should, and it creates a cascade of unintended consequences.
I think that's wonderful. And I like that at the end where you sort of question the environment. And I
Yeah,
almost look at that as that's sort of the shared responsibility or approach that the individual could take and say, okay, I got to, one, I got to question myself and
yeah,
understand
yeah,
what's important to me. Like, what are my values? What's my purpose? Why am I here? What am I trying to do? I have to understand that on one hand. And then on the other hand, I have to understand the values, purpose, and mission of the team or the
yeah.
organization or the workplace. And I think oftentimes a lot of it boils down to just either not understanding ourselves or not understanding our organization. And so it may actually not, it may not be misalignment. It may just be a misunderstanding of what we're
Misunderstanding.
looking for or they're looking for as well.
Yeah, and I think that's where the honesty and, authenticity comes into play here, right? Like challenging that and questioning that and being open
Mhm.
to having the conversation might allow us to get to a better understanding. Maybe, as you
Mhm.
said, the alignment is there and we're sort of misunderstanding each other.
Mhm.
I will
Mhm.
say that, as a general call to action or thought that all of us should have as leaders, as individuals, Chris, you may know Sister Tyranny Truman, who used to be our Mayo Clinic Values Council coordinator. But I've heard her speak in a number of settings. And one thing she often says that resonates with me is we are all becoming. No matter what age we are at, we are all becoming who we will or could be. And I think why that's important in a sense of belonging is we have to be able to create, beyond even safe spaces, brave spaces for ourselves to reckon with the experiences that we have, with the group experiences that we're having that challenge us on how we can get better. I think the biggest detriment to making progress in belonging, probably anything, is not actually acknowledging that there is still opportunity. And I don't think that if we can accept that we are all becoming, if that we are all still on the journey to who we are going to be or could be, the potential of who we could be, I think that creates a lot of space for that not to feel like a failure or like some sort of um, negative implication in terms of what we're doing and how we're performing, but rather it keeps us open to the curiosity of what could be. So I would just, I don't know if it will resonate with all of your listeners, but I think that becoming for me always keeps me open to the possibility, and it's a way to sort of challenge, um, am I getting limited in my thought processes? Or could I
Mhm.
think from a more potential perspective without assigning a positive or a negative to it, but rather
Mhm.
just being curious about what we could achieve?
Mhm. Well, and that gets back to the point you made in the very first section about how we as humans are very nuanced and
Yeah,
we're complex and we're not always linear. It's not always A then B then C then D, and sometimes it's a bit recursive, and that's okay. The whole part is that we're actively participating in the process and we're doing it with some level of intentionality, with
yeah,
some sort of direction or goal in mind. And then we got to give ourselves some grace when we mess it up, because we're going to mess it
right.
up and we're going to keep learning. And but that's the joy of the process.
Right.
Excellent. Well, Shawn, thank you so much for this
Yeah.
discussion. It's been really, really enlightening. I'd like to take a minute here. I'm going to summarize just by
Yeah.
recovering or running through my notes real quick, and then I'll have you summarize by answering our three big questions once again. So,
Okay.
for me, it started with your definition of belonging, which is a state of feeling seen, heard, valued, and supported in order to
Yeah.
let you grow as a
Yeah.
person and become your best self. And then you mentioned the big key elements to this are the three C's: comfort, connection, and contribution. Comfort being comfortable in kind of who you are and authentic with yourself. Connection being having a true community with authentic relationships with
Right.
others. And then contribution is making forward progress and understanding what our role is and how it's contributing to the whole. We went through a lot of common misconceptions around belonging, and that a lot of people think that it's linear, but it's actually quite dynamic and that we are nuanced. And it's not something that's just at work. This is also in our home lives as well. This is not just a nebulous kind of abstract concept, that there actually is evolving research in this
Yeah.
space. Also, I love the concept that it's not about choosing sides or picking a team. Just because you belong in one space doesn't mean you do not belong in another. So this is not an exclusive type thing. And it's not the same to all of us. We all have different definitions and needs of belonging. So this is not a one size fits all approach. And we have the ability to determine that for ourselves as long as we're intentional. And the research is showing, at least in the academic and professional spaces, increased academic success, increased productivity. People are happier, higher retention, lower turnover, and increased health benefits when we feel like we
Yeah.
belong, which is great. I like your framework of how it's a shared responsibility between the individual and the team or the organization. You talked a lot about some of the problems that we're solving, and if we are able to feel like we belong, probably one of the greatest benefits is that it will allow us to redirect our energy, because it's exhausting living in a world where you feel like you don't belong. And so
Yeah.
that the big energy save, but we're also going to reach our potential better. We're going to have higher productivity and be more enjoyable. And then you also gave us a great series of steps for a team or an organization to look at to improve belonging, and then also some steps for us as an individual to take in that third section. So that's my summary. Now I'm going to give you a chance to summarize here. So I'll re-ask you the three big questions,
Okay.
and you can
Do
give
it.
us sort of your rapid fire answers to
Okay.
each of these. So big question number one: what exactly is belonging, and why is it so important?
Well, first, belonging is a fundamental human need. And when we experience belonging, we feel seen, heard, valued, and supported. It's important to us because it allows us to achieve our highest potential. When we aren't directing our energy to trying to fit into spaces that we feel like we don't belong, we redirect that energy to being able to achieve higher outcomes. So I think it is that foundational human need and how it increases our potential when we find true belonging.
Excellent. Our second question: why do we struggle to feel like we belong and to ensure that others know that they belong?
Yeah. Again, I think it goes back to this human need to categorize things. That's a big part of this. There are places where we may not align with the values of that group. And I think that's okay as well. I do believe, though, that while everyone may not belong everywhere, there is the potential that they could belong. But again, it comes back to one of the core components of belonging, which is authenticity. We also have to be honest if we do align with the values and the perspectives of the places that we're trying to achieve belonging in. And if not, it's an impetus for us to seek places where we do find that shared purpose and alignment.
And then our third one: what daily habits can we take to create an atmosphere of genuine belonging at work and at home?
I think first listen to people, hear them for their authentic experiences, be curious about what are the sort of shared values and the shared purpose that aligns you to people, and then find ways to acknowledge that in authentic ways, create relationships, recognize people for their contributions, continually consider how you are realigning yourself to the purpose and what you're contributing, And above all else in that, I think being honest with yourself and with others is critical to genuine belonging.
Great. So now for the call to action. I always like to end this by giving a challenge to our listeners. Hopefully, it emphasizes our focus on actually changing behavior and doing things and moving stuff forward. So our challenge, I'm gonna use the model, the 3 C's model that
Yeah.
you gave us, Talent.
Yeah.
So what I want our listeners to do, get out a sheet of paper and write out the 3 C's. Number one, comfort. Give yourself some space. Number two, connection. And then number three, contribution. And then go through each of those. So, in comfort, you need to think about authenticity and do you feel comfortable being your authentic self? And probably in order to determine that, you need to figure out what is my authentic self and what do I value? What is my purpose? What is my values and my vision and mission? So, think through that a little bit and ask yourself, what would it take for me to feel that comfort? And do I feel it or not? Second, connection. This is about having meaningful relationships with others in the group, and ask yourself if you have those, and if so, highlight where it's going really well for you, and then highlight where it's not, and then see if you can make some improvement. And then last one, contribution. So, do you feel like you're making progress towards the shared goal or the purpose that you find meaning in, and that others do as well? So that's going to be our action item for you today to start wrestling with this concept of belonging. And remember, what you write down on your sheet of paper is going to look different from everybody else's, and that's okay. That's the purpose. That's the whole point of the thing, is that you have to define what belonging looks like and feels like for you, and there's value in those different definitions. Shawn, thank you so much for joining us and teaching us about this.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.
All right. So, to our audience, our title today was The Importance of Belonging: Why We All Need to Be Accepted, Valued, and Connected. Thank you so much for tuning in. To our listeners, remember to live intentionally, consistently, better. Keep striving to be the best human you can be so you can give your gifts back to the world, and never stop optimizing. Thanks for listening to the Mayo Clinic Human Optimization Project. If you like this episode, hit subscribe and leave a review. It helps others find us. Know someone who might benefit? Share the episode with them to join us in our mission to help as many people as possible become the best humans they can be. Have feedback or a topic idea? Email us at optimize@mayo.edu. And be sure to look for us on Instagram, X, and YouTube.
This podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be relied upon for medical, professional, or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified professional for any questions. The appearance of any guest does not imply an endorsement of them, their employer, or any entity they represent. The views and opinions expressed by the guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Mayo Clinic. Reference to any product, service, or entity is for informational purposes only and does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by Mayo Clinic.